Well, will it shake the region? It certainly could if it turned out the tragedy was seen as a deliberate act by the IDF, but that's extremely unlikely. And at present, we do not even know who's responsible, as you say. Al Jazeera accuses Israel, but I haven't seen evidence of it. Moreover, if it was an accident caused by negligence, the chance of that negligence coming from the Palestinian militants is equal to or greater than the chances that it came from the IDF. But, if bad faith players like Hamas want to exploit the tragedy and use it as an excuse to raise the level of the flames for some imagined benefit, that would certainly come as no surprise. Well, I think it depends. Israel's ham-handed treatment of the attack on the AP building last year was a masterclass in how not to do PR. I think what they did today was after the event was reasonable by calling for a joint investigation, and indeed, as was said, an autopsy and a look at the bullet would reveal pretty quickly what happened. Does it matter? I think this underscores that Israel's occupation of the West Bank is very toxic. Bad things are going to happen. Israel's going to always get blamed, and their pretense that they're not really responsible for what happens in the West Bank because A, there's terrorists here, and B, much of the population is under the Palestinian Authority for civilian purposes, and so Israel has deniability. None of that wins any sympathy around the world. And so to an extent, perceptions being what they are and people being as superficial as they can be, yeah, I agree. Anything that happens in the West Bank that's bad is going to look bad for Israel. A more strategic government in Israel would be looking for ways to disentangle itself from the West Bank, because these tragedies are going to happen. And we're talking today about the tragic death of a journalist, but every death is a tragedy. And I don't see anything good happening in West Bank until a change is effected.
It's not preventable. Maybe there's no one to blame in these instances, unless Danny will say harsher protocols are needed, as again in your previous role as chair of the Foreign Press Association. Excuse me.
Look, protocols sound good. It's always hard to argue with protocols and procedures, but I'm not really sure. There's always a trade-off between keeping journalists safe and enabling them to cover a war. The journalists themselves insist on access, and with that access comes risk. And this is something that as journalists, I think we, to a degree, have to accept, and we generally do. Journalists are not forced to go into war zones, and when they do, it's very courageous. And I'm proud of my former colleagues at AP and of Shireen for even being there. And it appears that today she just paid a terrible price in an unfortunate accident. No journalist should be targeted, but the terrible accidents are difficult to avoid, unfortunately. More than anything, more than Mohammed Adora, by the way. This reminds me of the AP journalist Nazir Darwaza, who was killed about 20 years ago in the Second Intifada by a ricocheted bullet in a Kasbah in Nablus. The difference with Mohammed Adora, which was easily convertible into a PR coup against Israel, was that you had video of a little kid cowering for long minutes. So that was a much more difficult and weird situation. Here, it was appears to have been a momentary shot gone astray by one of the two sons.
Yeah.